I want to start off with this. Whenever I came home, I went into the house by myself, and I was just kind of looking around. I was picking up, making sure that everything was in order, and I noticed something that was on our countertop, and I have a picture of it right here. I noticed this. Did y'all get it? Maybe no. Okay. Okay. You can't see it. It's sideways. It was from my daughter Rosie, and if you turn your head to the side, it says. And so all I read at first was, "Mama, I love you," right? That's all I read. I was like, man, that is the sweetest thing in the world. And then it says, "More than my dad." And I was like, I knew I didn't like that child. You know, it's like, what's wrong with her? I'm doing all these things to help make her life greater, and then she's going to love somebody. So today I want to talk about how to observe a lie, right? Because there's no way no, I'm just kidding. She loves her mom more than me right now. And it's just going to take some time for me to win that heart. But I do want to talk about something very important today. And it's kind of building off of what we talked about last week. See, last week we talked about revival. We talked about revival. What does revival look like? Okay, and I use this verse from Proverbs 29:25, where it says this, that the fear of man lays a snare, but the one who trusts in the Lord is safe. And I believe that that is the picture of what revival is. Sometimes people think the revival is other things, and I'm going to cover that soon, but they think revival is other things. But I believe at the very heart of every revival, whether it's individually or corporately, lies this, that you have a body of people, that you have a single person that says, you know what, I trust in the Lord over everything. And I'm not afraid to admit it. I may look like a fool to other people, but I trust in him greater than I fear in man. That's what we believe revival is. So how are you doing with that? How did your week go? I spoke with a few of you this week, and you said, man, I am living in such a way that I am stepping out in faith, and I'm declaring the goodness of God, and I want to live in such a way that people begin to recognize that I'm not afraid of them. I'm not afraid of what they may say. I want people to see that I love God, and I trust them no matter what goes on in my life. I put him above everything. And that's been cool to see that. But how are you doing with that? How's been your progress this week? You know, there is great power. There is great power in righteousness. I believe that. There is great power in people that put God above everything else, because it says that if we believe in Christ, we have been made righteous, right? So you are made righteous through your understanding and your belief and your trust in the Lord. And I believe that righteousness has the ability to impact things. It has the ability to impact things. In Proverbs 11:10, it says this, when it goes well with the righteous, when it goes well for the people that trust in the Lord over their fear of man, and when it goes well for them, the whole city takes notice. The whole city begins to rejoice. See, I believe that's the effect of people that are hungry after God, people that say, God, I trust in you, even if these circumstances look grim. I believe that mindset begins to impact those around them. It might start first in your family. Then it might spread to your friend group. And eventually what happens is it begins to spread to your workplace, and it begins to spread to your city. And that's what this is talking about. That when people are living in revival, when people are living with this trust in God, no matter what, that it begins to impact things. See, sometimes we think differently, though, with that. We're contrary in our thinking. That sometimes we look at it like this, okay? I have a small vase here. And I got some water that I'm pouring in, okay? Sometimes what we do is we believe that when we live out our lives for Christ, that it's a lot like oil going into water, right? That, I don't know if this was going to work. I didn't even try this. Maybe I should have tried it. And sometimes we think that this is what it looks like when we live for Jesus, that there's no impact, that the world will still stay here, and here we are. Right? Or vice versa, right? They're like, here we are. But that's not, now I do believe that's how it is for us individually, that when we go into the world will not stick to us. We will live differently than the rest of the world. But when you let your righteousness for God be the absolute priority in your life, when you trust in him more than anything else in your life, suddenly you begin to look differently. And actually, it permeates around into culture. Right? So sometimes we look at our life, our Christian life, as that oil and water. But that's not it at all. What it is that whenever Christ gets a hold of us, it's kind of like this. And what happens is slowly, over time, I believe the church is called to begin to shape and to change what the rest of the world does look like. Okay, I believe that when we begin to live, and you start to see this in Scripture, you see this in the New Testament, you see this in the book of Acts. When the church began to grow, the culture began to change. Now, there was opposition to that change, but the culture still shifted in a different way, right? But we talked about last week that whenever you start to live for revival, there are certain attacks that come your way, right? And we saw that in the book of Acts, right, where Paul and Barnabas, they set out on this mission, and immediately after proclaiming the gospel, after trusting the Lord over everything else, it says the division rose. People begin to divide other people. They begin to distort the reality of the truth, right? That's one aspect, but what did they do? They said, you know what, God, we still trust you even if division occurs. The next thing that happened, you remember, they begin to make threats to them. That's another attack that tries to squash revival in your own life, squash revival in a church, squash revival in society, is that threats begin to get made. And then they tried to give them misplaced praise. Okay, they begin to say, well, Paul and Barnabas, you're the reason why people are being healed. You're the reason why God is doing these great things. No, it had nothing to do with them. And so they stepped boldly through that. And then violence eventually came forth, and they began to get hurt in various ways. You see, there will be many things that will attack the revival of your life. There are many things that will come against you, whether it's division in your household, whether it's these threats from the outside, whether it's you start to think that you're doing this on your own, or violence comes to be. There's all these different things that try to squash out revival. But what if God's design was not for revival to stop? Think about this. Oftentimes when we think about revival, we think it comes for a season and then it ends. But what if it was God's intention for it not to stop? See, our focal point when it comes to revival, when it comes to our trust in the Lord, sometimes we can focus so much on the right now and we're not looking ahead of what's to come. I believe God's intention is that we will take this baton, that we will take our trust in the Lord so far, and then we will hand it off to the next generation and they will carry it even further. I believe that's what God's intention is. I don't believe that the blessing is supposed to end right now. You know that song, what is it? I think it's actually called The Blessing, right? By Carrie Job and Cody Corns. They said, look, may the favor of the Lord go before you, right? And that not only does it go for you, but it blesses your children and their children and their children and their children. When you start to read the Bible, when you start to look, especially in Deuteronomy 6, there was such an emphasis that he said, I want you to tell them the commands and the testimonies of God, and I want you to teach this to your kids, right? I want them to understand who I am. Why? Because I want you to take them to another level. What if God's design was not for your kids to start in the mud like you started in the mud? What if God's design was, hey, I'm taking you up to base camp of Everest. But whenever it's time for your kids, you might not be able to go all the way to the peak, but maybe when it's time for your kids, instead of your kids starting down from square one, you're already starting them from base camp, right? And they're going up. What if they don't have to taste the mud and all they can taste is the mountain? What if that's enough to sustain them, right? What if the goodness of God is enough to take them to that next level? See, sometimes I think that we think about Christianity as you need some pitiful, terrible testimony, right? And so sometimes our mindsets as parents, we can say, well, let my kid go through that so they can learn. What? It's like, no, I don't want my kid tracking in my house with all that mud, right? No, I want to show them the beauty and the worth and the goodness and the greatness of our God so that when they come to know him, they're already here. Because we're going somewhere. This is the end. This is how it's all going to end. Look at this in Revelation 21. It says, then I saw a new heaven. This is Jesus speaking. Well, this is John writing about what he's seeing Jesus do. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. The sea was no more. And I saw at that point, a holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death, it'll be no more. Neither will there be mourning or crying or pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. And he who was seated on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. See, that was the theme of this year's conference, is that God is making all things new. That's the end result. That's what's going to happen in the end. That in the end, everything, all the hurt, all the pain, all the destruction that has been caused by man, it's gone, right? All the pain, all the sorrow, that's a day that we rejoiciously look forward to. Now, while making things new is the promised end, the reality of that new time is breaking through currently in our current times. The reality of God making things new is actually breaking through to us right now, and it's done by the church. See, oftentimes we think, well, let me just look forward to the end. See, that's why I think a lot of people, they're looking so much to the return of God, because they want the judgment of the world to take place. They want people to die so that they can be restored. And I believe that God, through the power of his Holy Spirit, through the church, and birthing the church, that he says, I'm going to give you glimpses of that reality to where you can be restored now. You don't have to wait until the end. We don't have to throw this pity party saying, God, kill them, kill them, kill them, because God wishes that no man should be saved. Instead, that should encourage saying, God, save them, save them, save them, because you've given us power for right now. You've given us strength for right now. You've given us the ability for your kingdom to intersect with our reality today. And we believe that as a church. We believe that healing is for today. We believe that restoration is for today. We believe that deliverance is for right now. And we pray for that. So if you ever have a need, if you ever are struggling, we want to pray for you. Let us put our paws on you and trust in our great God to heal you, right? We're going to do that all the time. But that is not revival. Revival is not miracles. Revival is not healing, and revival is not deliverance. That's not revival. That can be the effects of revival, but that's not revival. Don't become disillusioned when things don't work out. Because there are times where we come in absolute faith and we pray that God would heal right now, and we don't see it yet. Right? We don't see it yet. You see, sometimes we can become disillusioned when things don't work out. Then that must mean that either there's A, something wrong with me, or B, this is not what I thought it was, or C, right, that revival really isn't here. But praying for those things, you see, healing is not revival. That is your kingdom come, your will be done. That is the reality of the new crashing into the right now, right? That is God's will being done on earth as it is in heaven right now. That's not revival. Revival is trusting in the Lord over our fear of man. Now, that can bring certain manifestations. I believe that when we step out in faith and we trust in the Lord over what other people may say, I do believe that people get healed. When we trust in the Lord over what people may say, I do believe that those demons, they're coming out, right? I do believe that as a church. We believe that together. But that's not revival. Revival is when your heart says, God, I trust in you, even if my circumstances may look grim. I trust in you, even if they come against me. God, you're my treasure. God, you're the one that continues to revive me. But our focal point has to be on next generations. Our focal point can't just be you, yourself, and whatever you're in. It's got to be, no, Lord, I want to prepare for the next. I want to prepare for the next. You remember with Jesus, when Jesus had those 12 disciples, all he was doing over those 3 years, what was he doing? He was preparing them to take what he had and bring it further. See, Jesus just reached that little area. But what did he tell them? Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. That's where I'm sending you. Right? So I'm taking you to base camp. I'm making a way where there's no way. And then I'm sending you up the mountain. And that's got to be our mindset. Remember in John 14, it says this. Jesus said this, truly I say to you, whoever believes in me, whoever trusts in me over anything else will also do the works that I do. And greater works than these he will do, because I am going to the Father. See, God took us to a certain point, and he says, if you trust in me, you're going further. You weren't meant to just survive. I've created you to thrive. I've created you to take this mantle further up the mountain. I shared this on a Wednesday a few weeks ago. I had watched this documentary one time, and it was talking about these butterflies. Anybody ever watch butterflies? Okay. Let me choose a different animal. Is that an animal? I don't even know what that is. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I know a lot about science, okay? Anyways, I was watching this documentary on butterflies, and there are these butterflies that they live in Mexico, okay, in Mexico. And what happens is they begin to make a migration up North America, and they go all the way to Canada. This is what these butterflies do, okay? This is their cycle. They go all the way up to Canada. Then when they get to Canada, they all come back. Now, you might be thinking, okay, what does that take? 24 hours, and then they get there, and then they come back. No, that's not what it's like. It takes them 4 generations to get to Canada. And then it takes them 4 generations to get back to Mexico. And what an amazing statement. What an amazing example of what I believe God's intention is for us and our families. That you see, what if those butterflies, what if one of those butterflies just said, you know what, I'm going to make it all the way to Louisiana, and then that 158-degree heat is going to probably knock me out, and I'm going to have my babies. I don't know how it works, but, I'm going to have these things, these little caterpillars, and they are going to, probably should have researched this a little more, and they're going to go, and I'm going to send them back to Mexico, and they're going to start over again. No, that's not what God's intention. So they go as far as they can possibly go. And then what they do is they hand the mission off to the next generation. And then the next generation goes as far as they can go. And then they hand it off to the next generation. And then that last generation goes as far as it can go, and it reaches where it's supposed to be. And then they start that process all over again. Wow, that is the mindset of us. That should be our mindset when it comes to raising our children. I was talking with a pastor at this conference. He was up in age. I won't say that he was old, but he was 80-something, okay? You can decide if that's old or not. Everybody's like, yeah, unless you're 80, and you're like, nah, that's not bad. But he was a pastor, and he had 5 kids. 5 kids. And I asked him, I was like, well, how did you do it? Because that's something that is always, I won't say a concern, but it's just like, that's always a heart of my prayer. Like, anytime I'm praying for my children at night, my number one prayer is, God, do not let what I do be a hindrance to them in coming after you, but only let it springboard them to love you even more. Because I see it all the time. I see it with pastors' kids, that they go down this terrible trajectory. And so anytime I find somebody that's been doing ministry, especially for that long, 80 years old, and they have 5 kids, I naturally always ask, how's your family? How did you do it? And he said, man, I'm going to tell you something. And I know this pastor, and he is very faithful. He's been faithful for a very long time, he and his wife, in serving in the ministry. And he said, what I did is I just showed my kids all the good things and the great things of God. I talked to them about the areas where I fell short. And he said, but all 5 of my children, they're not just in ministry today. Because we're all in ministry. I hope you understand that. Like, all of us, if we have the name of Christ, we are an ambassador for Jesus, meaning we're a representative, meaning you're in ministry. Congratulations. He said, but they're not just in ministry. He said, they're thriving in ministry. And I was like, wow. It's like, really? And he said exactly what we're trying to talk about today. He said, yeah, because I believe that's God's intention for every family. I believe that God's intention is for your family, your kids, to not go back to square one, but to start on like square 10. And to take that baton even further. That's the intention. Because think about it like this. Think about the relationship between King David and King Solomon. Solomon was one of King David's sons, right? Now, King David did all these great things for God. He went out and he was conquering the land. He was a man of war, but he was conquering all this land. And he acquired great wealth for Israel. He had done a pretty good job. I mean, he's a man that was after God's own heart. And I was reading in Proverbs recently, and it was amazing to me because we know the story of Solomon, right? That he asked, instead of asking for like riches and health and all these different things, what did he ask for? You remember? He asked for wisdom. God, will you give me wisdom? And I was like, wow, what a cool thing that this man asked for wisdom. But I was reading in Proverbs the other day, and this is what he says in Proverbs 4:3. It says, when I was a son with my father, tender, the only one in the sight of my mother. Do you have the next verse? In verse 4, he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast to my words, keep my commandments, and you will live. Another version says, seek wisdom above everything else. So at a young age, David began to pour into his child, where he says, when you get older, I'm going to take you to a certain point, and this is what I want you to do. I want you to live out what I'm telling you to live out, and I'm telling you your life is going to go well, right? He was taking his son to another height. He didn't want his son to start off where he was. He wanted his son to start off from where he ended, and he wanted to take it further. Now, what's interesting about the story of David and Solomon, I believe it's a picture of what Christ has for us as believers. Right? In every situation, think about this. Think about these people that have acquired great wealth before. And then they leave their inheritance to their kids. Almost every single time, what happens to that next generation? They go down, right? They leave an incredible inheritance to their kids. They get this great wealth, and what happens? Everything plummets as a result. The next generation, after a thriving generation, the next generation always declines. Right? That old saying that when we said it before, that hard times, they create strong men, and strong men create easy times, and easy times what? Create weak men, and weak men create hard times. And that cycle will repeat. And you see that throughout history. That's why you have all these billionaires saying, I'm not leaving an inheritance to any of my kids because I don't want them to be spoiled and then lose all the inheritance. Now, they're lying about that. They're just trying to prop themselves up as being righteous, but you know what I'm saying? Because they don't want the next generation to falter. Except for David and Solomon's relationship. And I believe it was a picture of what God intends for believers to have. You see, David was a man of war, and he acquired great wealth. But it says that Solomon actually took that wealth to new heights, right? He took that wealth to new heights, and in fact, he actually never went to war. So now, instead of ruling from war, he was ruling from peace. This next generation thrived. And I believe that God has called us to live from a position of peace. And I think that's a God's intention for you. But you know what? There's a lot of stumbling blocks. And don't end up like Solomon, right? Eventually, them ladies got to him. Ladies, many things can keep you from carrying that baton, right? Many things can keep you from bringing that baton further. You know, and I think there are three main ones. There's probably more than this, but I don't need it. There's three main ones that can kind of keep it. Like God intends for revival not only to happen in you, but he intends on you being able to pass that to your children so that we can take it further. But there are barriers sometimes that keeps us from handing that off to the next generation, that keeps our kids in the same pit that we were in. One of those is drugs. Drugs, especially like hallucinogenics, they will keep people in this terrible pit. I mean, there's this massive movement. I won't say massive, but there's certainly a movement that's going on in the Christian church that is promoting the use of hallucinogenics because they're trying to say, well, it'll bring this higher knowledge. That is a major destructive pattern. Drugs and addiction, they will wreck your family, and they will keep your family at square one and prevent you from handing that baton as far as you possibly can. Another thing that does it, sexual deviance, right? Distorted views of what God intends through sex, whether that's through pornography or even worse things than that, right? That will stop a revival in a heartbeat in your own life and in the life of your family. But I think one of the third things that does this, that prevents you from taking that baton as far as you can, is unforgiveness and bitterness. I believe that this is the worst one. Some of you right now, there is unforgiveness that you have. And I'm not saying that lightly. And there are things that you are bitter about right now. And I know it hurts, but it is killing you, and it's going to kill your family if you continue to hold that. The Bible says in Ephesians 4, he says this, Paul says this, be angry and do not sin, meaning you can be angry, right? It is possible for you to be angry and not sin. What was done to you was wrong. Whatever happened was terrible. You can be angry, but he says, do not sin, meaning that don't let this turn to unforgiveness and bitterness. Don't let it go there. But then he says, do not let the sun go down on your anger, which is key. Because if you let that sun go down on your anger so many times, eventually what happens? That bitterness begins to creep in. And then he says this, give no opportunity to the devil. I was reading some John Wimber quotes, and somebody asked him, can Christians have a demon? And he said, Christians can have whatever they want. They're free, you know? And he said, but that doesn't seem very effective to have a demon. Meaning, yeah, if you want to go down that road, you can give opportunities to the devil. And there are ways that he is scoping, and this is written to the church, that the devil is actively seeking. Demons are actively seeking to see where they can get in through a crack. And one of the best ways that they can get in through that crack is through a root of unforgiveness, of bitterness. Look what it says in Hebrews 12. He says this, strive for peace with everyone, and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. Go to the next verse. In verse 15, it says this, see to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. It defiles many people. That this root of bitterness, it actually has this effect of impacting other people. Anybody ever had food poisoning before? Okay. Few of you. Now, was it just you, or was there more than you that got food poisoning whenever it happened? More? So what happens is sometimes with these food poisoning stories is that people will begin to eat this dish that is tainted. And they can all taste, something's a little off. Actually, we did this one, I forgot. We did this one time with some chicken. You never did that? You smell the chicken, you're like, I don't know. And you're like, maybe, I think it's good. Or that meat's a little, it's like, oh, I just bought this and I forgot it in the fridge. I'm cooking it, right? And it tastes a little off. See, that root, it defiles many people, right? It creates an impact, and it makes things not look good. And bitterness can do that. Bitterness can do that. And I love how it uses that word root, because root can work in such a way that it can dig so deep that you actually don't even notice it anymore. You don't even see it in there anymore. That roots can just disappear into that soil, and you lose sight of it. We were in North Carolina, and it was amazing. Like, so my wife and I, we have a fence in our backyard, and before the storm, it was like it had all this nice ivory and stuff that created some kind of privacy fence. Well, after the storm, all that got destroyed, right? So now all of our neighbors can see us. And I'm trying to get them to put up a privacy fence so I don't have to do it. And so I walk around outside with my shirt off all the time. Like, I'm always like, please, my kids get dressed out. You know, it's like I'm trying to get them to put up this privacy fence. But so we're always looking for things that we can put up like an ivory. And we were in North Carolina, and we saw this vine that was everywhere, right? And we're like, man, I want this vine. We were thinking about cutting this vine off and bringing it out to Louisiana. Now, we're not those kind of people, right? And then Don and Hunter said, oh, no, you don't want nothing to do with that vine. That may seem pretty, but that vine has taken over all of the mountains. It's, what is it, kudzu? Kudzu? And I thought it looked cool. My wife thought it looked cool. We were literally about to step into that reality, and Lake Charles was going to be under kudzu forever, right? But that's how bitterness works. The root might start, but then it grows 2 feet a day. And it keeps spreading, and eventually you can't see anything anymore. So I want to kind of highlight some areas from a story in the Bible. A story that was actually used on this retreat in a different way, but I think it's still relevant for right now. I want to highlight five reasons, 5 causes of potential unforgiveness that will destroy your personal revival and negatively impact your future generations from the life of Joseph. We know the story of Joseph, right? Joseph was a wee lad, and he was the youngest in his family, and his dad loved him. His dad loved him so much. The favor of his father was upon him, and he went out and he had some dreams, and he told his brothers. Now, what happened? His brothers hated him as a result. In fact, what it says is that whenever the kids, the older kids, they saw the favor of the father on Joseph, this is before the dreams, they began to hate him. And you know what? That happens when you're in revival. One of the number one causes that can spring up bitterness. You see, in your life, there are going to be certain crossroads that you come across, right? And you're going to hear me say this a couple times here. There are crossroads where you will encounter something and you have a decision to make. Will I trust in the Lord even though this is happening? Or will I become bitter about it? And a lot of people, they go right to bitterness. A lot of people do this. And so the first cause that can happen in your life when you're living out this mission of God that God has called each and every one of you to, when you're living that out, the first thing that can happen is ridicule. When people ridicule you, you come to a crossroads. Am I going to trust the Lord through this ridicule, or am I going to become bitter? And so the very first thing that we see is when they saw that this man was living in the favor of his father. When people begin to see you living in the favor of your father because you trust in him more than anything else, ridicule comes. People begin to not like that. So what did Joseph do? Joseph said, I trust in the Lord. Right? And so then he goes and tells them a dream. This dream where he's talking about these bundles, right? These bundles that are bowing down to him. And it's a representative of the family is bowing down to Joseph. Now, they didn't like that dream. And so they hated him even more, it says. They hated him even more. And now he had a decision. Joseph had a decision at that moment. I can become bitter, or I can still trust in the Lord that he gave me this dream. So what did he do? He trusted in the Lord because you know what he did? He went and told him another dream. He doubled down on his dream. He trusted in the Lord. So he goes and tells him another dream. And this time his father even rebukes him. They hate him even more. So he comes to another crossroads. So he has these dreams. See, Joseph, he didn't understand the impact he was having at his young age. I don't know what his motivation was for going and share his dreams. He may have been naive and he just was not able to read the room that he was hated. That's possible. Or he was a little arrogant. We don't know the heart that he had. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have dreams. What do you dream about in relationship to your walk to God? We have a dream problem today. Like we do. We have a dream problem. One of the main messages that they were saying, like if I were to take a survey right now and I was to ask you, hey, write down on a piece of paper or type in your phone, what is your dream that God would use you for? What would you write? Some of you might say, I haven't ever thought about that. Some of you might say, yeah, that was a long time ago. One of the things that they were telling us at the conference is that if your dream for God does not make you more dependent on God, then you certainly need a bigger dream because you're able to do that by yourself. Like I was telling the worship team this morning, for the singers, I was like, if your dream is just so that you can sing on key and not be flat, you can just get voice lessons for that. But if your dream is, I want to take these people from here to the throne room of God, whoa, you need help. You need dependency on God. You need to get a bigger dream. We need to have bigger dreams. I think the problem why we don't have big dreams anymore is because I think sometimes the older believers, they take it upon themselves that they need to humble the dreamers in the church, right? I remember that happened to me early on in my walk with Christ. I was passionate for the Lord, and people said, you're not always going to be passionate, son. Younger people don't need you to humble them. God will humble them. And he does humble them. What they need from us is they need to be encouraged in their dreams. What does God place on your heart to dream? But what did Joseph do? When he was ridiculed, he trusted in the Lord. Now that didn't help him very much, right? Because the second thing that happened in his life is he was betrayed. Right? So if you remember the story, after he goes and tells them their dreams, they hate him. And then one day he goes out to find his brothers. They're in a foreign land. They're in a faraway place. And he goes and he sees them. And when they're coming, they say, you know what? We want to kill him. We want to take this guy out. We want to hurt him. We want to send him to the grave. And then somebody was like, you know what? If we kill him, there might be a curse on us, and we don't really want that. So maybe a good alternate would be let's just sell him into slavery, right? And they thought that that would be sufficient, that maybe God would be pleased with that. I don't know why they did it, but they decided they were going to sell him into slavery. Now, I want you to imagine this level of betrayal that Joseph had to undergo. The people that were enlisted to be his protectors, not only did they just say, we don't want to be that, they did the worst thing imaginable to him. And that is the same for some of you in here, that some of the closest people that have been in your life, maybe even your parents who have been enlisted to protect you, they betrayed you. And betrayal, when you come up to betrayal, there is a major crossroads that you come to. And when people are betrayed, they have a tendency to go towards bitterness and unforgiveness and saying, did you see what they did to me? Did you hear what they said to me? Do you know what they put me through as a kid? They don't deserve any of that. What they did was wrong, and it was wrong. But you have a mindset right now, am I going to go to trust in the Lord that even through the hard times, even through the terrible circumstances, he's going to work this out for my good? Or am I going to go down this path, this barrier that's going to not only hinder my own life, but hinder the generations to come? What am I going to do right now with this betrayal? Betrayal is a great revealer, right? Especially in your walk with the Lord. Bitterness is betrayal is a great revealer that are you bitter about something, or are you going to remain faithful on the call of God in your life? You know, in ministry, and since you're all in the ministry now, let me just kind of give you a little 101 of what it looks like. In ministry, people are going to let you down. And they're not just going to let you down. Right? When you decide, Lord, I'm going to be in revival, I'm going to trust in you, and it's like, man, here's Cole right here. Hey, bro, we're in revival together. Let's just go, and we're going to conquer the world. Right? Be prepared, Christian, as you do that there are going to be people, I'll just use Cole as an example, because I know he would never do anything like that. Somebody said, that Cole will not just come up to me and say, hey, man, I don't think I can do this. I got something else. No, there will be people in your life that will come into your life that not only will they turn their back on you, but when you turn your back, they will stick a knife in you. There have been things in this walk with Christ where it's like, I cannot believe people say these things sometimes. I can't believe they would betray like that. And it's coming, but the question is, when you get to that crossroads, can you trust again? Because people are going to hurt you. People will hurt you, unfortunately. Can you trust again? Because God is not concerned so much about the right now. He's more concerned about this mission going forth. Can you trust it? Can you invest in someone again? And forgive that. Can you say goodbye to one and say hello to someone else? Are you able to do that? Remember, revival is not about circumstances, because it says that he was sold into slavery. But it says in verse 2 of chapter 39, it says that the favor of the Lord remained on Joseph. So he decided, you know what, my brothers did this, I'm going to keep trusting in the Lord. And even though his circumstances look bleak, the favor of the Lord was still with him and went with him wherever he goes. Now the third thing, I'll go through these last three pretty quick, was that he was falsely accused. Anybody ever been falsely accused? Right? Misunderstood? You know, Joseph, he went into the new area, Potiphar's house, and then Potiphar's wife, she got the hots for him, right? It says that he was young and handsome. He had a good build, right? At the retreat, they said that they talked about this. They said, so being not handsome or not a good build can be a blessing sometimes, right? It was for him. It was not for him. And so he was good looking, and she got the hots for him, and she came on to him, and she chased after him. And this is what he said. You want to see the mindset of this man? This is what he said in Genesis 39:9. He says this, when she came for him, he said, he is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except for you. This is him talking to his wife. And he says, because you're his wife, you're Potiphar's wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against Potiphar? No, against God. This was his mindset. Everything that I do, doesn't matter what circumstance, I trust in the Lord, I don't fear man, and I'm not going to do anything that will cause havoc to this revival that I'm in. Right? I'm going to keep going this way. That's not good enough, so she rips off his clothes, and he runs around naked, and then he gets thrown into prison. So despite his faithfulness to God, he still ends up in prison. He was betrayed, and now he's falsely accused. Now, while you might not be put in prison, I want you to understand that I want you to get ready to be accused. That when you get on fire for the Lord, people are going to come at you from every angle that they can. Oh, you know what, Jordan? The reason why you're doing the youth is because you like to be seen. The reason why you're playing drums back there is because, man, you like to just do your little drum fills and do your halftime playing, and oh, you look so cool, right? They're going to go right after your heart. Oh, I know why you serve in the kids ministry, right? You're just trying to work your way up to be something else. These accusations will come after you. The more and more you pursue God, the accusations will come against you. Now, hear me close. Not every accusation is false. Sometimes accusations have a way of dealing with your pride. So how do you handle, you yourself, how do you handle being misunderstood? How do you handle criticism? How do you handle being falsely accused? Does it lead you this way, or does it lead you that way? Because Joseph, again, decided to go that way. See, maybe what the reason why God may put you into situations where you're being falsely accused is because maybe he's trying to make you to be unoffendable. Maybe he's trying to make you so strong that it doesn't matter what comes your way, you trust in him no matter what. And if you are so fragile that you have to constantly defend yourself, maybe it's showing God that you still need some more strength to depend upon him. How do you handle being falsely accused? Because when you get to know not being offendable, it makes for great forgiveness. The fourth one is this. So he was what was he? He was ridiculed, he was betrayed, he was falsely accused, and number 4, he was forgotten. So he goes into prison after being falsely accused. He goes into prison. You could think that he had every right to try to defend himself in that moment, and it doesn't seem like he did. The favor of the Lord was on him. And then these two people come up with these dreams. You got the cupbearer, right? You got the baker, and they have these two different dreams, and he gives them an interpretation. And it was good news for the cupbearer. The cupbearer was going to get out of prison in 3 days, and he was going to go and serve the Pharaoh again. And what did Joseph say? Just remember me, bro. All you got to do is remember that this guy right here got you out of this mess right there, right? That's all you got to do. You don't have to remember my name. Just remember there's some dude back in there interpreting your dream. And what happened? Dude forgot. And he forgot him for 2 years. See, for some of us, one of the root causes of bitterness is that you've been forgotten. You were not recognized. You were not honored. Whatever it may be, you were forgotten about. And what happened in your life is it made you start going down this path over here. You were so bitter that they didn't remember you. You were so bitter that your name didn't get called. And what it did is it actually created a cease in the revival of your life. And it's creating a hindrance for your family in the future. Let's go this way. And then the worship team, you can come up because the last one is this. The last one is time. Time is a great factor, a cause that can cause bitterness in people's life. You know, when Joseph had his dreams, it took 22 years to see the fulfillment of those dreams. 22 years to see the fulfillment of that dream and of those promises. What have you given up on from God? What have you stopped praying for? Because you know what bitterness does? Bitterness begins to creep in when you don't see the fulfillment of what you believe God has spoken over your life. When you begin to read the Word of God and you see certain aspects that maybe God has promised me peace that surpasses all understanding. Maybe God has promised me forgiveness. Maybe God has promised me healing in this area. Maybe God has promised me extra grace to get through this. And it doesn't seem like the fulfillment of that promise has come to pass. And so what happens is you become bitter with God. What have you stopped praying for? Because revival is chapter 45, verse 5. where it says this. When Joseph was at the end of his life and his brothers had come in, 22 years had passed, and he comes up and he makes this amazing statement to them. Actually, whenever they come in the room, you want to see how to live as a Christian? It says before he confronted them, he had all the Egyptians leave the room. Meaning that he was not going to bring the sins of his brothers to light and publicize it to everybody. Oh, you want to learn about grace? There you go. And then he talked to him. He said, yeah, I'm David. Remember me? You know? And right there, they remembered him and they got scared. But this is how he handled his time. He said, don't be distressed or angry with yourselves that you sold me here. Don't be angry that you betrayed me. Don't be angry that you did the worst thing imaginable that you could do in our culture, and that was that not just you didn't kill me. You sold me into slavery, and then you lived as if I was dead. How many people you've been forgotten about in your family? You've been betrayed by your family. You've been betrayed by your friends. You've been forgotten about in society. You've been ridiculed. You've been hurt. There's pain, and it's been a long time, and you ain't seen anything. Well, his mindset was, I forgive. Don't worry about it. You sold me here, but God sent me here before you to preserve your life. Verse 8, he says this, for the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which, so he sent me here, verse 8, he says, so it was not you that sent me here, but it was God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. So I want to just close today. Let's do this. Let's just stand together. They're going to dim the lights. I'm going to give you a second to just think about something. I heard somebody end this conference. They said, I want us to stand up and just get into a position to receive. I like that. That was good. Just let's get into a position to receive God here. What unforgiveness do you have that is preventing revival in you or your family? But forgiveness is not I can't bring you to forgiveness. Like, I can't bring you to that. You have to do, this is a step of faith that you have to do. And so right now, I just want you to get into a posture of prayer. And the prayer team, if y'all can come up too, and prayer team, you can pray while you're up here too. But and if you need someone to help you with this, we want to encourage you to do this because I want you to be delivered. But I believe one of the main issues that prevent restoration, that prevent healing, that prevent deliverance of any kind of oppression that you're under is this root of bitterness that is causing you to not move forward. It defiles you so much. And so I want us to get into a position of prayer. And I just want you to begin to pray and say, Lord, I want you to think about the person that's hurt you the most. See, it does not mean that you have to trust that person. That's not what it's saying. But it's time for you to be able to release that person and to trust in the Lord that those terrible things that may have happened, that the Lord is going to work them out. But you've got to let it go. You have to let it go. And so just get into a position of just prayer and just saying, Lord, I forgive this person. Lord, I forgive this circumstance. God, I forgive these people that were involved. But let's do that corporately right now, just in where you're at. You're hoping for those miracles. I'm telling you, this could be a reason that you're not seeing this because you have a barrier in your life of unforgiveness. What is the hurt that you have? What is the pain that you're experiencing? Who wronged you terribly? And let's just begin to pray. Pray right now and just say, Lord, I give them to you and I forgive them. And declare it. Declare, I forgive them. Forgive them.
about 2 years ago, I was dealing with some unforgiveness and that I didn't know about. So I asked God, I said, reveal it to me. And I thought maybe there was somebody I hadn't forgiven for something. And I started thinking about things in my life that, and I'm like, no, I've forgiven that person. I don't hold anything against anyone. And God said, you have unforgiveness in you. I'm like, God, show it to me. And he said, Don, he said, you haven't forgiven yourself. And when he told me that in my spirit, I broke down. I knew what he was talking about because I was holding myself guilty for things. He said, who are you to hold yourself guilty for something that I have forgiven you for? I've thrown it away. So if you have unforgiveness in your heart and you haven't forgiven yourself for something that you've done, and he also showed to me that the people that I thought that I had hurt through this unforgiveness or through what I had done, he said, they hold nothing against you. They don't even recall it. He said, you're the only one. And he said, you have my permission to forgive yourself. So if you have got something in you that right now that you haven't forgiven yourself for, God says you have that permission because he has already forgiven you if you've gone to him with your repentance, with a repentant heart. So don't let unforgiveness in your heart keep you from a closer relationship. And God just ignited in my life at that moment. And he showed me the things, and don't hold that against yourself. Forgive yourself because God has forgiven you.